Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Whiteboard. My name is Haresh Patel, and I'm the Director of Business Alliances at White Labs. We are a digital agency specializing in SaaS and e-commerce SEO. And I've got Haresh Patel with me. He's the former CEO of Mercatus. Now, Mercatus is an investment data management platform for private market fund managers and asset owners that needs to solve the complexity of their private investment data. A big welcome to you, Haresh, and I'm so happy to host you today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, before we dive into Mercatus, can you please let the viewers know a little bit about you and your professional journey so far?
Absolutely. Born in India, came to the US when I was 6 years old, grew up in New Hampshire, went to University of Notre Dame to get electrical engineering degree, which brought me to Silicon Valley. I spent the first 25 years in semiconductors in sales and rose to VP of worldwide sales of 3 publicly traded companies. And then after being totally bored, I wanted to change, and I got lucky with being able to shift to the solar energy industry as a VP of worldwide sales. That was the good news. The bad news, in less than 6 months, I didn't have a job for the first time in my career. And I decided in 2009, I was finished working for companies. I would figure out what I would do, but I was not going to work anymore for anybody. And I just made a commitment to myself, rather than feeling badly, that I would just write a book one day that the best thing that ever happened was getting fired. And that's what spawned Mercatus. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I didn't have the name either in my head, but all I knew that would be something, hopefully, that would be successful. So that's what got me into starting with solar sales channel, because that's what I knew how to do. So we represented several different companies. We learned that getting the order was the easy part, but our clients didn't know how to get financing. So we became an investment bank to help them get financing. That's when we realized how inefficient it was to move data rooms around and translate that into an investment memo. So we looked around for software, couldn't find anything, and we built it for ourselves. And when we went back out on the road with our software, our buy-side clients, which are the same clients that buy at Mercatus, fell in love with the software, said, "Hey, where did you buy it? Where did you get it? We want that." And I knew the moment I started hearing that, we would become a software company. So we dropped the first 2 business models. We raised a Series A, and then eventually Series B, and eventually sold the company in September 2021 to State Street Bank. So that's the journey in a quick nutshell.
All right. That's brilliant, actually. And I would love to hear from you a brief overview of Mercatus and its role in the private market investment space, and what really, basically, like how exactly the platform has evolved since its inception.
Sure. As I said, I started the business as a solar investment platform, and it did exactly what it does today, which is anything physical that requires an investment requires a lot of people diligencing a data room that has lots and lots of documents. And they build a financial model in Excel, and they built another set of documents either to report on the financial performance, or to analyze the financial performance, or to provide data transparency. And so in its simplistic form, not to get too technical, and I promise not to get too technical, Microsoft should have finished what they started, and they still haven't done it. They have Word, they have Excel, they have PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Right? They sell it to you as a bundle, but they never connected it. That's all we did. We did like what Uber did. Uber connected the driver, the cell phone, the cell tower, and the human. Right? They took existing infrastructure and connected. That's all we did. We just said, why do bankers live in data rooms? Right? Why did they create financial models that have full of riddles and mistakes? And then why do they create a PowerPoint that you can't diligence, right? You can't drill down from a PowerPoint back to the financial model.
Yeah.
So we just, in our own infinite wisdom of not being a software company or being an accidental software company, connected the financial model and made it the heart of that's where our IP was, that's where our patents were, is to connect the financial model in native Excel, but host it in the cloud in the way that you could connect hundreds of different financial models that were all the way from an oil tanker to a commercial building, to a real estate residential portfolio, to a solar power plant is where we started.
Yeah.
Each one has its own unique financial model. And we just learned how to connect all those in accordion. So then you could do forward-looking scenario analysis, you could stress test the portfolio, and you could give the investors, the senior leadership, finally the dashboards they needed to make good investment decisions a lot faster.
So how does Marketus addresses the challenges of scaling funds without compromising on the efficiency bit, accuracy, and the speed?
I think, like I said, as soon as you have humans, we're all smart, but we make mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times it's just hard to see the data. Quite frankly, I wouldn't say our value proposition wasn't to increase the accuracy of data. The value proposition was you can see the data in the way you can spot an error sooner, right? If you just show a PowerPoint, yeah, I've got a 9.8% IRR on this particular project and it's got 30-year cash flows, but you can't go in and challenge that, right? Yeah. But if you're able to look and say, wait a minute, I'd like to drill into your assumptions. Oh, let me go pull up the financial model, and everybody's scrambling on their laptops. In our platform, you can immediately drill into the financial model, look at the assumptions, change the assumptions. And then you say, but I don't remember that in the document. Okay, let's go to the document directly. So everything was always at their fingertips. So it was about increasing the speed of decision-making, the speed to find, hopefully, and have that dialogue around, is there a mistake? Are the assumptions right? Because a lot of times there may be no mistakes, but the assumptions are wrong, right? Somebody might assume that we have 5% inflation. Quite frankly, it's 20%. Yeah. Now, interestingly, if you just change that one parameter in the world before Mercatus, it used to take our private market investors, some of the most sophisticated investors in the world, 2 to 3 weeks to determine the impact of change in just one parameter, because they have to address every single financial model that was invested 25 years ago that was on somebody's laptop that maybe left the company. So it wasn't because it took all that time, but it was just how do you herd all those rabbits into one room and then connect them together. In our case, we all had everything, the data was centralized. We just gave the investor their own data and made it more accessible. We didn't provide external data sources. That was their job. If they wanted to do that, we could certainly feed it in, but it was all around taking what was underneath their own nose and illuminating it.
That's brilliant. And I would love to dig deep onto the unique platform features you got. Can you please elaborate a bit on particularly like in portfolio management, deal management, valuation management, all of these areas, how exactly marketers, the platform basically helps these investors and fund managers?
Yeah. So again, centralizing the data is the first thing.
Yeah.
Second element of that is structuring the data, right? Structuring is really important. And as much as I want to tout that technology can solve structuring, it does not solve structuring. It requires human intervention to look at that. So we built a phenomenal services team out of India to help structure the data. And structure might mean you may call a solar power plant megawatt. I may call it gigawatt. Just by that mg versus that small delta, that data is unstructured. So you have to be able to, and over time, machine learning and stuff will correct all that. But we would have the data be absorbed through the document technology-wise, but you always have some human eyeball looking at it to spot those mistakes in structure. So that was always a critical part of it. So structuring the data was the second one. The third one was really connecting all those financial models. Everybody always told us, yeah, but my project is so unique, it's so different. And quite frankly, we just didn't look at it that way. It's like the difference between your DNA and my DNA and a chimpanzee is what, 98.99% the same?
Exactly.
And so financial models are all the same from our eyes. There was just that very small percentage that was different. So we said, let's not worry about why that one's different. Let's worry about what's common. So we took all the commonality and made it an accordion. And then you could always have the corner cases. So it was all around just being logical and practical around how do you structure it. And I think the third part that was really critical, so centralizing the data, structuring the data, controlling those financial models, and ultimately creating a systematic workflow. Because again, if you have 10 people trying to put beans into that little bottle that game we played in school, at some point you have to be organized. You have to say, stop, everybody can't try to put the bean at the same time. So when we put together workflow, centralized data, and financial model control and made those all highly intertwined is what made Mercatus unique.
That's amazing. And would love to know what sets marketers apart in enabling scenario analysis and valuation at scale. And like basically for both at the asset and fund level, basically. Yeah.
I would say surprisingly, it was actually the domain knowledge of the people.
Wow.
the perception that we knew our customers' business better than they did. So they always brought us on saying, yeah, not only can you give us good software, but you might be able to tell us how badly our business is and give us better business processes. And so that was, if there was a jump ball, we always won because of the knowledge of our people and knowledge of our team in India, as well as in Europe and North America. So that was probably number one. Technology wise, it was clearly around how we control that financial model, to let them live in Excel
Yeah.
and build their own financial model. But it connected in a way. That was where the technology secret sauce was. And then I said the other three pieces were everybody had some element of workflow, data centralization, and financial model control. That were usually the weakest, but putting them all three together, nobody put them together as elegantly as we did.
Okay. And would love to know how exactly is the customer journey? How exactly is the customer journey in your platform, and how your team collaborates with the client to ensure that the platform meets their, I would say, evolving needs, because that does change. At the time of onboarding, it would be something else, and they carry forward their operations. It might change. So how exactly do you adapt?
Well, it's evolving. And just to be for the record, I am now a former CEO. I left the company back in March. So I'm sure it's evolved a little bit since then. But it turned out to be that as hard as it was to develop technology, managing the client turned out to be significantly more challenging. In the early days, the executives bought our platform. That's what we designed it for. It was for the top 3 or 4 people of the fund to give them the dashboards they needed, because they were the ones frustrated. They were the recipients of bad data or incorrect data or unstructured data. And so they weren't able to make decisions. And a good investor won't make a decision until they're really comfortable with the data, right? And so all it was doing is delaying decisions, and they were losing deals to somebody else who could make a decision faster. But the problem was they bought the software, and then we would have to train all the people, and they would look at it saying, what did my management buy? Why would I use it? And so it turned out the sales cycle actually started after we sold the software. Educate the people on why this would make their job easier. A lot of people looked at it and say, wow, this replaces my job. So they didn't want to. So we had a lot of failures early on as a function of lack of adoption. So we had to put a whole customer success management team in place to take, instead of the 3 people and train them, now we have to train 300 people across the world, because these global investors have teams all over the world. And so we had to invest heavily in training, because training is the best form of adoption, right? Or increasing the chance of adoption. So that was the first challenge. And then the sales and marketing cycle, which we'll get into, my God, there were more mistakes we made than we eventually figured out how to get the recipe. That was another challenge, just the sales and marketing process of getting to these clients and convincing them that they had a problem, because most of them were very successful, had massive returns, were ultra high net worth individuals, and they hadn't made a mistake. So it's like giving a youngster, you need to buy insurance one day, because one day you'll die. And it's, no, I'm invincible. So convincing that they actually had a problem was a big challenge in terms of human behavior.
That makes sense. And you actually mentioned it very right. Trust in data is crucial, and would love to know how does your platform ensures data accuracy and transparency for the clients, and what measures are in place to build and maintain this trust?
Right? It is all about trust, right? If you trust the data, you could make a decision. If you trust the data, even if you don't like it, you can make a decision, right? Because all that investors are trying to do is assess the risk. Right? They only look at risk first, and they say, okay, for that risk, how much do I want to get a return? The risk is high, I want a higher return. The risk is lower and lower. So it was just, again, giving them data that they could diligence real time. So transparency was the biggest thing we were trying to solve, right? Transparency in a fast, efficient manner to be able to identify, something looks wrong. Let's go back to the team that's trying to sell this project to us. Let's go ask for more information. Let's go do another study. So it's giving them the tools to move faster with more accuracy, and to give them that transparency. And through that transparency, then they can improve the accuracy of the data. So just as an example, we had a client out of Australia, one of the largest investors in onshore and offshore wind. And again, they took 3 weeks to find a mistake. They knew immediately when they presented, wait a minute, there's no way this set of projects can yield this kind of return. But how to actually find out where that mistake was took them 3 weeks, because again, they had to go back to each individual financial model, find out why they didn't connect. And again, we said, let's do a head-to-head competition. Let's have that team look at it, and let us look at it post importing all the data and centralizing it in Mercatus. We found it in less than 5 minutes. So it's about speed to accuracy. Just having the data centralized and structured gives them speed, right?
Yeah, definitely. And because you mentioned there are a lot of integration options out there when it comes to your platform, would love to know how do you ensure seamless integration with existing technologies used by the fund manager and asset owners primarily? Yeah.
That was another journey, right? We talked about adoption, but we also realized that the customer has a lot of different pieces of software.
Yeah.
And over time, they have 30 or 40 pieces of software. And really what we solved for is, if you think of the world of Legos, right? You, as a child, we all play with Legos. Legos are all individual building blocks.
Yeah.
Initially, when Lego came out,
there's a lot of potential pitfall of relying on multiple technology point, right?
Yeah.
Would love to know the importance of a cohesive platform in that
Yeah,
sense.
so that's what I'm trying to explain. So when you think of Legos, right? Legos was initially sold as individual building blocks, right? Ultimately, their sales didn't take off until they gave the thin green plate.
Oh.
The thin green plate allowed you to put the blocks and build like a foundation, put windows in, and you could create all kinds of stuff. So the industry didn't have that thin green plate. That was Mercatus. We basically, with that thin layer, that was a mile wide and inch deep, that connected all existing data sources. When I said data room, I also meant there were other data sources. Like, for example, you need a CRM. You need something like Salesforce or Marketo, but that had a lot of data locked up into it. Then you need an ERP system. We were not an ERP system, but the ERP system is probably where the valuable data is. Say, okay, if you told me I was going to do X 20 years ago, did I actually do X or not?
Yeah.
So the ERP has to be connected to CRM. So Mercatus was really that inserting that thin green layer into the software ecosystem to be you could either put it as a master at the top level, or you could put it as a slave right at the bottom. And people designed it differently. Most people use this as the master, so that the data into our platform, and then they could manipulate it and they could see the whole thing.
No, that makes sense. And would love to. Now let's talk a bit on the marketing front. I would love to know, what all channels are you leveraging for your own product marketing, and what strategies are really working on your field?
Right. So if you remember, my background is sales, and so it's direct sales. So I only had one mentality around: you build a direct sales team. And I knew enough about marketing to be dangerous, but I could barely spell it. So I'm being humorous. Ultimately, I managed both teams, but my specialty was sales. So we started off with just hire a bunch of salespeople. That's the most expensive way to do things. And then getting the right kind of salespeople, we had to go through 3 tries.
Okay.
It was not the fault of the salespeople, but it was not really understanding the type of salesperson we needed. And so you burn through cash every time you hire salespeople. The sales is the most expensive resource. So we didn't invest a lot in marketing, quite frankly, at first, until I met the head of marketing of Marketo.
Okay.
He came through an introduction through a good friend of mine that graduated the same year that I did. And I asked her, boy, I said, your content is so good. I read everything you guys publish.
Yeah.
And I said, who is the brainchild behind it? He goes, oh, that's easy. It's John Miller. Can I get an intro, Amy? So she gave me an introduction. I met with him, and he was like a doctor. 5 questions. Who's your target client? Blah, blah, blah. And then he gave me a quick prescription. He said, listen, certainly wouldn't waste money on billboards, certainly wouldn't waste money on trade shows, booths, wouldn't waste money on television ads, radio ads. There's some obvious stuff we were never going to do anyways, but he eliminated. He goes, as self-serving as it may sound, what you want to invest in is your email list. Make sure it's rich, and you invest in a channel of communication. So become a news channel for yourself. And that's essentially the recipe that we followed. We eliminated lots of stuff in our budget, or never got to spending it. He gave us that very clear advice. He said, you're talking about 10,000 people in the whole world. Yeah. That's your audience, a very small audience of over 8 billion people. So I don't need to spend money blanketing the airwaves. So he goes, find out who those 10,000 people are, build a massive mail list, put out rich content, and pump it to them directly, and then track it, monitor it, all that sort of good stuff. So it was the best advice we got from a marketing perspective. And that's what we did. We invested a lot. We hired a company in India that was very good at once you gave them a target list, they came up with very accurate names and emails and phone numbers.
Yeah.
And then we spent a lot of money on content, both video, written content, all kinds of forms of content. And we engaged our clients through that, not promoting our product, but promoting thought leadership. That was probably the first. And then we obviously invested a lot in SEO, because you're trying to reach a lot of people. 10,000 is a lot. It's not a lot, but at the same time, not all 10,000 decision makers. So you have to be able to get the people that are assigned to say, hey, can you go look for some software? That's not going to be the senior leadership. They're not going to be sitting on the internet looking for Mercatus. They're going to assign it to some low-level intern or first-level worker. And so we had to be able to make sure that we were educating the population. So we invested a lot in SEO so that we came up in searches. And then we figured out by experiment, we spent $2,000, $2,000, $2,000 equally between Facebook, Google, and all the LinkedIn. And over time, we would eliminate what didn't work and continue to double down on what did work. So that was a experimentation.
So on the paid front, Harish, what channel really worked for you? Did Google Ads give you a good ROI, or was it Facebook? Because I'm sure like the nature of your business is such that you need a lot of touch points for you to get a qualified lead, to be honest, right? So would love to know what exactly really worked for you on the paid front.
I think the Google was probably the most effective, followed by, I think, LinkedIn, if I remember correctly. Again, I don't have the data at my fingertips that we have a marketing team. But yeah, it was clearly Google was always number one. So we just continued to spend more and more. But it wasn't necessarily the paid search per se, but it was just, again, trying to get more elevation to. And then, yeah, when we started placing ads where you have either sponsored or you get on the sidebar, those turned out to be effective. Ultimately, what turned out to be the most effective for us was actually, remember, our client base is, in our case, well, I think everybody thinks their client base is unique. Our client base are typically 3 to 4 key people at a $40 billion fund. They're usually the keynote speaker at a Bloomberg conference, right? They're not floating around at the cocktail hour. They have security guards that get them on the stage and get them off the stage. And they're not spending time. They have an entire team, and their secretary is looking at their emails. So all the traditional marketing approaches weren't going to work.
Yeah.
What we learned was how to get on a panel with them. First of all, we didn't have the money initially, so we tried to figure out by scratching and clawing for free to get on a panel. Because once you got on a panel, then you built a relationship. Right? You had to practice in advance. You had to get to know them before or afterwards. So that was ultimately our best conversion. Then when we raised money, we said, okay, we can spend $25,000 to host a panel and be the moderator. That gave us even more control. And so most of our clients some of our best clients came from that approach. That was in addition to, it means that wasn't the only thing. You still had to educate through everything I talked about before, but it was the ability to rub shoulder to shoulder or find techniques to find them as they're stepping off the stage. Is what turned out to be our most effective channel. And then ultimately our final channel was, even with all of that success, it is still a word of mouth business.
Yeah.
As much as banking is sophisticated, whatever, it's still a good old boys club. And so when we tried to raise Series C, we specifically earmarked the service or provider channel, because we knew that even if we were on the panel with them and they built a relationship, if somebody said, hey, these guys are really good, and they went to college together. And so that's why we circled companies like State Street and others to say, if you're going to be, we wanted that to be an investor, because the introductions were key to accelerating the sales cycle. So that turned out to be the last sales channel. Then, and ultimately they were also looking to increase their customer base. So this is why they acquired us and why we wanted them as an investor. And they turned out to be an acquirer, not just an investor.
That's amazing. One thing also, like I'm curious to check with you, because the whole business is so interesting and unique in its own way. How exactly is the churn rate for you for the platform?
Churn rate is still not acceptable. You always want 0. And if we churn, it is usually around still the adoption issue. I don't think we have, even after a 10-year journey or 11-year journey, it is just an ongoing challenge, and you learn each time when you lose a client. So we're still well under industry average, but it's painful, right? Because it takes a lot of effort to get a client. It takes multiple years to support them. And then it fails usually because people don't use it. And when they don't use it, then they look at it during budget time saying, if we're not using it, why are we paying this money? Because it was not an expensive piece of software.
Yeah. Makes sense. Now, looking ahead, how do you envision the future of private market investing? And what role does marketers aim to play in shaping that future?
It's going to be all around speed and accuracy. One of my most favorite movies is Margin Call.
Yeah.
In Margin Call, a young guy out of college, I think intern or one of the most junior guys, discovers a problem.
Yeah.
And then he alerts the senior leadership and they realize, oh my God, the world is going to end. And so they call the CEO and he flies in at 4 a.m. They're all around a conference room. Nobody wants to speak up. And finally they point to him and he says, yeah, because this is, and the CEO stands up. He goes, yep. He goes, you know why I get paid the big bucks? I can determine if the music is speeding up or slowing down before everybody else.
Mhm.
You're telling me, and he looks at Demi Moore, uses a couple of F words saying, you're my chief risk officer and you didn't know this was going on. And this youngster told us and shame on you. And he used a few good choice words, but he basically said, I need speed, I need accuracy. And so it is going to be around, there will be consolidation in the industry.
Yeah.
And the ones that'll be the winners, and those are the ones who will adopt technology and embrace it and actually use it to their benefit. Those that are, and there's still a vast majority that still don't believe in technology, they still believe in old-fashioned investing, will get marginalized because it is about speed and accuracy.
Makes sense. So Harish, we're coming to an end, and I would love to have a quick rapid fire with you now. Are you ready for that?
Sure. If I don't know the answer, I'll let you know too.
Okay. Any funny nicknames your family, friends, or work colleague used to call you?
Yeah, I just realized this one when I just met with my dad a few months ago, and he told me a story about when I was under a year old, and I guess I used to run really fast, and I don't know how they connected it, but I don't know. I had my first nickname was Totyo, T-O-T-Y. I don't know how they came up with that, but that's apparently what they called me. So that sometimes if I meet my old dad's friends, they still refer to me by that name.
Brilliant. What was the last Google search?
The last Google search. We're planning a trip to India soon.
Okay.
So my daughter got engaged, so beginning to look for all kinds of options of what are we going to do and how much to spend and all that sort of good stuff.
What's something you could eat for a week straight?
All Gujarati food.
Yeah. Even I have nothing good. Okay.
I'll have to put a plug in for my wife. She's a really good cook, and eventually she married me without knowing how to make anything. And now she's a published author of a famous Gujarati cookbook and working on book number 2. I have the hidden gem in the house of being to eat whatever I feel like whenever I want. But now that she's published a book, if I ask something, she points toward the shelf. She goes, you know how to make it.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay. What is not a big deal to most people, but is a torture to you?
When it comes to I would say writing, most people look, it's not a big deal. I look at it and it's in my head, I can verbalize it. But as soon as I try to put it in typewritten form, there's something that gets lost between here and my fingertips and the keyboard. For me, it's always been an Achilles heel. So I didn't realize until I built my management team, they were all great note takers. And because they did the detailed note taking and then converting it, my thoughts into thought leadership. And the same, when I trace back to my college friends, all of my good friends were great note takers in class because I needed those notes to study for exams. So I would always befriend the guys that were good note takers. So some behaviors just don't change.
Yeah, that's the reason powered note takers are so much in trend now. They are.
Yeah, because I learned over time that I was much more dyslexic than I thought. But as soon as I was writing, I wasn't listening. I wasn't able to listen. And if I was listening, I wasn't able to write. So there was couldn't multiplex like most folks. Whereas other people learn, they write, they actually learn that way, right? By writing.
Yeah, you retain more for sure.
Yeah.
Coming to my very last question, are you a private person or not?
I'm a reserved person, but I'm open about everything more than my family would like. If you ask me a question, I usually have a hard time hiding the real answer. I would say reserved, but you ask me a question, I'll give you an honest answer.
Then you're outspoken. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Harish, for all the time, all the wisdom, all the information that you've shared in today's session. I really loved it, and I really appreciate your time here with me. Thank you so much.
Likewise, I enjoyed it well, and good luck.